The silver towers of Lumina gleamed under the light of 3 moons, their perfect surfaces reflecting the stars above. Inside one of these towers, Ash stood before the High Council, her head held high despite the fear churning in her stomach. Next to her, Nova's shoulders were tense, but her face showed no emotion, just as they had been taught since childhood. The council chamber's white walls seemed to close in around them. 5 elderly council members looked down from their floating platforms, their faces as cold as the metal beneath Ash's feet. Their silver robes sparkled with embedded technology that showed their high status in Luminan society. "You have broken our most sacred laws," the head counselor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Providing restricted medical technology to the lower castes threatens the very foundation of our society." Ash wanted to argue back, to tell them about the dying child she and Nova had saved, but she kept quiet. The child had been born into the worker caste, deemed unworthy of advanced medical care by Luminan law. When Ash had found her struggling to breathe in one of the lower-level corridors, she couldn't just walk away. Nova had helped her steal the needed medical unit from her family's private stock. Together, they had saved the child's life, but someone had reported them, and now they faced the consequences. "We have reviewed your family histories," another council member spoke, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Both of you come from respected lineages. Your actions bring shame to your houses." Through the chamber's crystal walls, Ash could see their family standing in the observation area. Her mother's face was turned away, while Nova's father stared straight ahead, as if his daughter didn't exist. The sight hurt more than any punishment the council could give them. "The law demands punishment," the head counselor continued. "However, given your youth and your family's standing, we have decided to be merciful. You will be exiled to Earth." A small gasp escaped Nova's lips, the first crack in her perfect composure. Earth was considered a backward planet, barely worth noting in Luminan studies. Its people still used fossil fuels, and hadn't even colonized their own solar system. Being sent there was seen as a fate worse than death. "You will be stripped of all advanced technology except for your universal translators and basic survival gear," the council member to the right declared. "Your family names will be struck from the records. You will never be allowed to return to Lumina." Ash felt Nova's hand brush against hers, a tiny gesture of comfort that would have earned them a reprimand in normal times. But they were already condemned, so what did it matter now? "The transport pod is ready," the head counselor announced. "You have 10 minutes to say goodbye to your families." But when Ash and Nova turned to the observation area, their families were already leaving, their backs straight and proud, as they abandoned their daughters to exile. Only Nova's younger brother remained, pressing his hand against the crystal barrier, tears streaming down his face until a guard pulled him away. Guards led them to the transport bay, where a small pod waited. It was an old model, designed for atmospheric entry but not comfort. As they were secured into their seats, Ash noticed Nova's hands trembling. "At least we're together," Ash whispered as the pod's door sealed shut. Nova gave her a small smile, the first real expression she'd shown since their arrest. The launch was brutal, pushing them back into their seats as the pod shot into space. Through the small window, they watched Lumina shrink until it was just another star in the black void. Their home, their families, their whole world, all of it gone in moments. As the pod's automated systems set course for Earth, Ash and Nova sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They had saved a child's life, but the cost had been everything they knew. Now they were headed to a planet they'd only studied in history lessons, a primitive world that still fought wars over resources and religion. The pod's computer announced their journey would take 3 days. As they settled in for the long flight, neither of them knew that their punishment would turn out to be the greatest gift they'd ever received. The transport pod shuddered violently as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Red-hot flames lit at the windows while warning lights flashed across the control panel. Something was wrong. The entry angle was too steep, and the pod's old systems weren't correcting properly. "Hold on," Ash shouted, grabbing Nova's hand as they plunged through the clouds. The ground was rushing up too fast, much too fast. Through the window, they could see a vast expanse of green. A forest. Their training told them. Not the best place to crash, but better than the large bodies of water they'd passed over earlier. The pod's emergency systems fired at the last moment, slowing their descent just enough to keep them alive. They hit the trees hard, branches snapping against the pod's hull as they crashed through the canopy. With a final bone-jarring impact, they slammed into the ground. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the pod's metal hull creak and cool. They were alive. Somehow, they were alive. "Are you hurt?" Nova asked, her voice shaky. In the dim emergency lighting, Ash could see a small cut on Nova's forehead, but nothing worse. "I'm okay," Ash replied, testing her limbs. The pod's gravity compensators must have worked just enough. She tried to stand and found it surprisingly easy. "Nova, look, we're stronger here." Nova stood too, marveling at how light she felt. Earth's gravity was weaker than Lumina's, and their bodies, designed for a heavier world, responded with unexpected strength. When they pushed open the pod's jam door, it gave way easily under their enhanced strength. The forest around them was nothing like the carefully maintained gardens of Lumina. This was wild, untamed nature. Massive trees stretched toward the sky, their branches thick with green leaves. The air was rich with strange smells. Decay and growth and life all mixed together. Small creatures made sounds in the distance, and a cool breeze carried moisture against their skin. "It's so messy," Nova said, but there was wonder in her voice rather than disgust. She reached out to touch a tree trunk, feeling its rough bark. On Lumina, they'd never been allowed to touch anything in its natural state. Everything was processed, sanitized, controlled. Ash checked their survival gear, the only technology they'd been allowed to keep. They had their universal translators, basic medical supplies, and enough nutrient patches to last a week. After that, they'd have to find food like the humans did. According to the pod's navigation, we're near a human settlement called Seattle, Ash said, looking at their simple communicator. "It's about 20 kilometers that way." She pointed through the trees. "We should hide the pod first," Nova suggested, always practical. Together, they gathered branches and leaves, covering the crashed pod as best they could. Their enhanced strength made the work easier, though they quickly discovered their fine clothes weren't made for manual labor. As they worked, the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors they'd never seen before. Lumina's atmosphere created soft, muted sunsets, but Earth's sky exploded in brilliant oranges and pinks. They stopped working to watch, transfixed by the display. Maybe this won't be so bad," Nova said softly. She'd removed her outer robe, now torn and dirty, leaving her in a simple tunic. Without the formal clothes of their caste, she looked younger, more vulnerable. They decided to start walking while they still had some light. The forest floor was uneven, full of roots and fallen branches, but their enhanced strength helped them keep their balance. Small animals scattered at their approach, creatures they recognized from their studies, but had never seen in real life. As darkness fell, they could see lights in the distance, the glow of the human city. It looked nothing like Lumina's elegant towers. This was a chaotic sprawl of buildings of different sizes and shapes, all of them somehow working together to form a whole. "Remember," Ash said as they walked, "we have to blend in. No talking about Lumina, no using our full strength unless we have to. And we need to find human clothes as soon as possible." Nova nodded, but she was smiling slightly. "At least we don't have to pretend to be emotionless anymore. Have you noticed? We've shown more feeling in the last few hours than we were allowed to show in years back home." Home. The word hung between them. Lumina wasn't their home anymore. This strange, wild planet was their home now, whether they liked it or not. As they walked toward the city lights, Neither of them knew that they would soon come to love this exile more than they'd ever loved their life among the stars. The morning sun found Ash and Nova huddled in an alley behind a row of shops, their clothes dirty and damp from the night's rain. They had walked for hours through the outskirts of Seattle, watching humans from a distance, trying to learn how to move and act like them. The city was overwhelming, full of sounds, smells, and constant movement. A delicious smell drifted through the air, making their stomachs growl. Their nutrient patches would last a few more days, but the smell was impossible to ignore. They followed it to a small shop with large windows. Through the glass, they could see humans sitting at tables, drinking from cups and eating strange foods. Coffee and hope. Nova read the sign above the door, her universal translator working perfectly. What's coffee? Before Ash could answer, the back door of the shop opened. A tall man with gray-streaked hair stepped out carrying bags of trash. He spotted them and stopped, surprise crossing his face. "Hey there," he said gently, as if talking to scared animals. "Are you two okay?" Ash and Nova exchanged glances. This was their first real test. "We're a bit lost," Ash said carefully, grateful that their translators worked both ways. The man looked them over, taking in their dirty, strange clothes and tired faces. Instead of asking questions, he smiled. "I'm Jack. I own this place. Would you like to come in for some coffee? You both look like you could use something warm." They followed him through the back door into a small kitchen. The smell was even stronger inside, rich and complex. Jack pulled out 2 chairs at a small break table and started making something with a large, shiny machine. "I'm Ash," she said, remembering to use just her first name. "This is Nova. We're new to Seattle." Jack nodded, not pushing for more information. He placed 2 steaming cups in front of them. "Careful, it's hot," he warned. Nova took a careful sip, and her eyes widened. On Lumina, all food and drink was designed for pure nutrition. This had no nutritional purpose at all. It was just for pleasure, and it was wonderful. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than Jack could know. "You know," Jack said casually, leaning against the counter, "I'm looking for help around here. Morning rush gets pretty busy. Job comes with meals, and I've got a small apartment above the shop that's just sitting empty. Previous worker moved out last month." Ash almost dropped her cup. "You'd give us jobs and a place to stay, but you don't know us." Jack shrugged. "I know what it's like to need a fresh start. Sometimes people just need someone to give them a chance." He looked at their clothes again. "I've got some spare clothes upstairs too, if you need them. My daughter left some things when she moved out." They spent the rest of the morning learning about the coffee shop. Jack showed them how to work the coffee machine, how to take orders, how to count the strange paper money humans used. He didn't ask about their past or why they were in the alley. He just taught them what they needed to know. By afternoon, they were wearing clean human clothes and serving customers. It was harder than any work they'd done on Lumina. Physical, demanding, and constant. But every time they successfully made a drink or gave the right change, they felt a surge of pride. The customers were fascinating. Humans of all types came into the shop, wearing different clothes, speaking different languages, showing their emotions openly. Some were kind, some were rude, but all of them were so alive, so real. "Look at them," Nova whispered to Ash during a quiet moment. "They're supposed to be primitive, but they've created this whole system of connecting with each other, over drinks that serve no practical purpose except to make them happy." Ash watched a group of students laughing at a table, sharing a plate of sweet bread. On Lumina, we'd never sit with people outside our caste. Here, they just mix, all of them together. As they cleaned up that evening, tired but satisfied, Jack showed them to the apartment upstairs. It was small and simple by Luminan standards, but it had soft beds, hot water, and a window that looked out over the city. "Get some rest," Jack said, heading back downstairs. "Morning rush starts at 6. He paused at the door. "Whatever you're running from, you're safe here." After he left, Ash and Nova stood at the window, watching the city lights come on. Below them, humans hurried home from work, met friends for dinner, lived their messy, emotional, wonderful lives. "We're supposed to be studying them," Ash said softly, "learning their weaknesses, but all I see is strength." 2 weeks had passed since Jack took them in, and the coffee shop felt more like home than anywhere on Lumina ever had. Ash watched Nova dancing slightly to the music playing through the shop's speakers as she made drinks. On Lumina, such movement would have been seen as wasteful and emotional. Here, customers smiled at Nova's obvious enjoyment of the song. The morning rush was in full swing when a young man stumbled in, his clothes wrinkled and eyes red from crying. Nova took one look at him and started making his usual order before he reached the counter. When she handed him the drink, she added a small cookie, something they'd learned from Jack about human kindness. "Bad breakup," the man said, his voice rough. 3 years together, and she just left. On Lumina, relationships were arranged based on genetic compatibility and social status. The idea of choosing a partner for love, then suffering when that love ended, would have seemed illogical. But Nova reached across the counter and briefly touched the man's hand. Another human gesture they'd learned. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Take your time. There's a quiet table in the corner." Ash felt something strange in her chest watching Nova comfort the stranger. On Lumina, they'd been taught that emotions were a weakness, that caring for others outside your caste was dangerous. But here on Earth, she was learning that emotions could be a different kind of strength. The shop's door chimed as Maria walked in. She was a regular customer, a scientist who worked at the local environmental research center. She always asked them interesting questions about their views on Earth's climate and ecosystems, and they had to be careful not to reveal their advanced knowledge. "The usual?" Ash asked, already reaching for the special tea blend Maria preferred. "Please," Maria smiled, but her eyes were sharp and curious. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, where did you two study? Your understanding of atmospheric chemistry is remarkable." Ash felt her hands freeze for a moment. They'd gotten better at blending in, but sometimes their knowledge slipped through. "We read a lot," she said carefully. Maria nodded, but Ash could tell she wasn't satisfied with the answer. As she made the tea, Ash watched Nova helping another customer. Her friend had changed so much in these few weeks. They both had. The rigid posture and controlled expressions they'd learned on Lumina had softened. They smiled more, laughed more, felt more. During their afternoon break, they sat at the small table in the kitchen where they'd first had coffee. Jack was teaching them to bake cookies, another skill that would have been beneath their caste on Lumina. The sweet smell filled the kitchen as Nova carefully removed the hot tray from the oven. "You've both come a long way," Jack said, watching them with what they'd learned was fatherly pride. "When I found you in that alley, you were like robots. Now look at you. Nova's singing along with the radio, and Ash, you're telling jokes to customers. We had a very strict upbringing," Ash explained, which wasn't exactly a lie. Emotions weren't encouraged. "Life's not worth much without feelings," Jack said, sampling one of the cookies. "Even the bad ones have their purpose. They teach us, help us grow." Later that evening, as they cleaned the shop, Nova suddenly stopped mopping. "Ash," she said quietly, "are we still gathering information about Earth?" The question hung in the air between them. Their exile had supposedly been part of a larger plan. Observe Earth's weaknesses for future reference. But in the weeks they'd spent here, they'd written no reports, made no observations about military capabilities or technological vulnerabilities. Instead, they'd learned about kindness from Jack, about resilience from their heartbroken customers, about joy from the music that played in the shop, about comfort from the warm drinks they served. They'd learned that humans' emotional openness wasn't a weakness, it was what made them strong. "I think," Ash said slowly, "we're learning things about Earth that Lumina never thought to ask about." Nova nodded, understanding in her eyes. Things that make me wonder if we were ever really the advanced ones. Through the window, they could see the sunset painting the sky in those beautiful colors they'd never tire of seeing. A group of friends walked past, laughing together, while a couple across the street held hands. All these displays of emotion and connection that would have been forbidden on Lumina now seemed like the most natural things in the world. Ash found herself watching Nova more and more, noticing how her eyes crinkled when she smiled, how gracefully she moved between tasks, how her laugh had become freer and more frequent. These feelings growing inside her would have been suppressed on Lumina. Here on Earth, they felt like flowers blooming in spring. Natural, beautiful, and unstoppable. Rain pounded against the coffee shop windows as Ash wiped down tables after closing time. The stormy weather had kept customers away, giving her too much time to think about the message they'd received that morning. Their old communicator, hidden in the apartment upstairs, had lit up for the first time since their arrival on Earth. The message was from another exile on Earth, warning them that they weren't alone. Other Luminans had been sent to different cities across the planet, all with the same mission: study Earth's weaknesses. But the message revealed something darker. Their exile wasn't just punishment. It was preparation for invasion. Nova came out from the kitchen, her face troubled. They hadn't spoken much all day, both weighed down by the knowledge of what their presence on Earth really meant. The silly human music playing through the speakers felt wrong now, like a happy tune at a funeral. The door chimed. They both looked up, startled. The shop was closed. Maria stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat. But something was different about her usual friendly expression. She looked serious, determined. "We need to talk," Maria said, pulling a tablet from her bag. "And this time, I need the truth." Ash and Nova exchanged glances. Maria walked to a table and sat down, placing the tablet in front of her. On the screen was a satellite image of their crash site in the forest. The pod's outline was clearly visible despite their attempts to hide it. "I'm an environmental scientist," Maria said quietly. "I study atmospheric anomalies. The night you arrived, my instruments detected an object entering Earth's atmosphere at impossible speeds. When I investigated the crash site, I found this." She placed a small piece of metal on the table, a fragment of their pod with Luminan writing on it. Nova started to speak, but Maria held up her hand. "Let me finish. For weeks, I've watched you two. You know things no ordinary person would know. You move differently when you think no one's watching. Faster, stronger. And sometimes, when you're tired, you slip up and talk about things that don't exist on Earth." Ash felt her heart pounding. On Lumina, discovery by a lesser species would have meant immediate evacuation and memory wiping of all witnesses. But they weren't on Lumina anymore. And Maria wasn't just some test subject. She was their friend. "You're right," Ash said softly. "We're not from Earth." The words hung in the air like smoke. But Maria didn't run, didn't scream, didn't reach for a phone to call authorities. Instead, she smiled sadly. "I know. I've known for a while. What I don't know is why you're here." Nova moved closer to Ash, their shoulders touching. The simple contact gave them both strength. "We were exiled here as punishment," Nova explained. "But this morning we learned the truth. Our people, they're planning something terrible." They told her everything. About Lumina, about their crime of helping the lowercase child, about the other exiles scattered across Earth. Maria listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each revelation. "So your people think we're primitive," she said when they finished. "They see our emotions as weakness, our diversity as chaos, our art and music as wasteful." "We thought that too, once," Ash admitted. "But we were wrong. So wrong. The things we've learned here, the way humans live and love and help each other, it's not primitive. It's beautiful." Thunder crashed outside, making them all jump. In the brief silence that followed, Nova spoke up. "Maria, we want to help. We know Lumina's technology, their ways of thinking. We can help Earth prepare, warn other cities." "Why would you do that?" Maria asked. "Help us instead of your own people." Ash looked at Nova, seeing in her friend's eyes the same emotion she'd been feeling more and more lately. On Lumina, it would have been forbidden. Here on Earth, it gave her courage. "Because Earth is our home now," Ash said firmly. "And you humans, with all your messy emotions and illogical kindness, are our people now." Maria stood up slowly. For a moment, they feared they'd misjudged her. Then she walked around the table and hugged them both, another human gesture they'd come to love. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We have a planet to save." The basement of Coffee and Hope had become their secret headquarters. Maria had brought in computers and communication equipment, setting everything up after closing hours. Jack, after they'd told him the truth, had simply nodded and said, "I knew you two were special. Didn't guess alien special. But hey, nobody's perfect." Ash sat at one of the computers, using her knowledge of luminant communication frequencies to track down other exiles. Nova worked beside her, writing messages in their native language, warnings about the invasion plan, appeals to their shared experiences on Earth, reminders of the beauty they'd found in this supposedly primitive world. "Another response," Nova said excitedly, pointing to her screen. "Two exiles in Tokyo. They've been running a small bookstore. They say they've also grown to love Earth. They want to help." Ash smiled, watching Nova's face light up with hope. In the past week, they contacted 15 other exiles. 12 had agreed to join their cause, each sharing stories of how Earth had changed them. 3 hadn't responded, which worried them, but they couldn't focus on that now. Maria rushed down the basement stairs, holding her tablet. "My colleagues at the research center finished analyzing that piece of your pod. We can use this to set up an early warning system for luminant ships. It's not perfect, but it's something." They worked through the night, combining Earth technology with their luminant knowledge. It wasn't as elegant as the systems they'd had back home, but it had a unique efficiency, like the coffee shop upstairs, where every small part worked together to create something greater than its pieces. "You know what I love about Earth?" Nova said suddenly, looking up from her work. "How they fix things. On Lumina, if something's broken or imperfect, we replace it. Here, they repair, they adapt, they make it work. Like Jack's old coffee machine. It's got dents and scratches, but he keeps fixing it because it has character." Ash found herself staring at Nova, noticing how her eyes shone when she talked about Earth, how her hands moved expressively. All those little emotional displays that would have been trained out of them on Lumina. Something warm bloomed in her chest, a feeling she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. A beeping from their communicator interrupted her thoughts. Another exile had responded, this time from Vancouver. But the message was different. This exile warned them that 3 luminant scouts had already arrived on Earth, preparing for the first wave of invasion. "They're here," Ash whispered, fear creeping into her voice. On the screen, coordinates appeared showing the scouts' location, just outside Seattle. Maria immediately started calling her contacts in the government, people she'd quietly warned about the possibility of invasion. Jack came downstairs with coffee for everyone, his calm presence helping them focus. "What do we do?" Nova asked, her hand finding Ash's under the table. The touch sent electricity through Ash's arm, making her heart beat faster despite their dire situation. "We show them what they're up against," Ash said firmly. "Not Earth's weapons or technology. They already know about those. We show them Earth's real strength." Working through the night, they crafted their plan. Maria's government contacts would handle the official response, but Ash and Nova would approach the scouts directly. They would show them the coffee shop, the bookstores, the music halls, the art galleries, all the wasteful things that made Earth special. As dawn approached, they finally took a break. Jack had gone upstairs to prepare for opening, and Maria had left to coordinate with her contacts. Ash and Nova stood by the small basement window, watching the sky lighten. I'm scared, Nova admitted, something they never could have said on Lumina. Not of the scouts or even the invasion. I'm scared of losing this. Earth, the coffee shop, Jack, Maria. She paused, looking at Ash with an intensity that made Ash's breath catch. You. The moment stretched between them, full of all the emotions they'd learned to embrace on Earth. Ash found herself moving closer, drawn by something stronger than gravity. Nova, she whispered, on Lumina, they said emotions made us weak. But I've never felt stronger than when I'm feeling things about you. The sun rose over Seattle, painting the sky in those beautiful earth colors they'd come to love. As Nova leaned in and kissed her, it was nothing like the formal pair-bonding ceremonies on Lumina. This was wild and sweet, and completely human. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees of Discovery Park as Ash and Nova waited. This was where their journey on Earth had begun, near the spot where their pod had crashed months ago. Now they were back, but everything was different. They were different. The three Luminan scouts materialized in front of them, their silver uniforms gleaming. They wore the expressionless faces that Ash and Nova had once thought meant strength. Now they could see the emptiness in that manufactured calm. Exiles, the lead scout said, her voice cold. You have violated protocol by warning others of our arrival. Explain yourselves. Nova stepped forward, her hand firmly clasped in Ash's. The scout's eyes widened slightly at this emotional display. We're not here to explain, Nova said. We're here to show you something. Behind them, music began to play. Maria had helped set up speakers throughout the park, and now the sound of a local street musician's violin filled the air. Other exiles they'd contacted had come to support them, and they too stepped out from the trees, each showing the ways Earth had changed them. An exile from Tokyo held a book of poetry. Another from Vancouver carried a painting he'd made. Two from Sydney wore clothes they'd designed themselves. Each of them displayed the art, music, and emotion that Lumina had forbidden. This is disorder, the second scout said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. This is primitive emotional behavior. No, Ash replied. This is strength. Let us show you. They led the scouts through Seattle to all the places that had changed them. They showed them the coffee shop, where Jack was teaching the young barista how to make the perfect latte, the two of them laughing over spilled milk. They showed them the public library, where people from all walks of life sat together, sharing knowledge freely. They took them to a small art gallery where Maria had helped set up an exhibition of Earth's natural wonders, photographs of sunsets, mountains, and storms that made even the scouts' perfect posture soften slightly. Look at how they help each other, Nova said, pointing to a group of strangers helping push a car that had broken down. Not because of case or duty, but because they choose to. Their emotions don't make them weak. They make them connect, adapt, grow. The lead scout watched as a street musician started playing, and people passing by stopped to listen. Some dancing, others dropping money in his guitar case. This is inefficient, she said, but her voice held a note of wonder. Life isn't about efficiency, Ash said softly. We learned that here. It's about living, really living, feeling everything, joy, sadness, love. She looked at Nova as she said the last word, and Nova squeezed her hand. The scouts were silent for a long moment. Finally, the lead scout spoke. Our preliminary report will indicate that Earth's emotional connections make them unpredictable, difficult to conquer. The resources required would be inefficient. They all understood what she wasn't saying. She had been touched by what she'd seen, but couldn't admit it yet. The other scouts nodded in agreement, already composing messages that would discourage invasion plans without directly challenging Luminant beliefs. As the scouts prepared to leave, the third one, who had been quiet until now, looked at Ash and Nova's joined hands. You found something here, she said. It wasn't a question. We found everything here, Nova replied. We found home. The scouts disappeared as quietly as they had come. Around them, Seattle continued its daily life. Messy, emotional, beautiful. Other exiles came to congratulate them, each sharing stories of their own discoveries on Earth. Maria hugged them both, and Jack appeared with celebratory coffee for everyone. Later that evening, Ash and Nova stood on the roof of the coffee shop, watching another spectacular Earth sunset. Music drifted up from the street below, and the smell of coffee and baking bread filled the air. "What do you think will happen on Lumina?" Nova asked, leaning her head on Ash's shoulder. "Change," Ash said simply. "Slow but sure. Those scouts will never see things quite the same way again, just like us." Nova turned to face her, smiling that free, emotional smile that Ash had fallen in love with. "Remember when exile was supposed to be our punishment?" Ash pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her body, the beating of her heart. Around them, the city lights began to twinkle on, each one a star in their new universe. "Best punishment ever," she whispered, and kissed Nova under the Earth sky that had become their home.